In 1971, a single income could buy a house, a car, and raise a family, with one parent staying home. Not a wealthy income, an ordinary one, the middle of the middle. And that same ordinary life on one income is something most families today cannot reach no matter how hard they try. So what happened? Americans didn't suddenly stop working, yet one paycheck became two, and even two started feeling like one. Because it wasn't one thing, it was four. Four invisible breaks across a single decade that quietly rewrote what an ordinary life could afford. Most people can't name even one of them. By the end of this, you'll know all four. But first, look at what that 1971 paycheck could actually do, because the number sounds impossible. The median American family that year earned about $10,290. Your instinct is to laugh. That sounds like poverty, but watch what it bought. The average new home cost around $25,000. Do the math. The house was about 2.5 times the family's annual income. Today, that ratio is closer to 6, 7, or 8, where people actually want to live. A new car ran $3,000 to $4,000, a few months of income, not a decade of debt. Gas was 36 cents a gallon, and the minimum wage, the legal floor, was $1.60 an hour, which bought more than 4 gallons of gas. Today, the minimum wage buys barely 2 gallons. The floor itself used to lift you higher. So this wasn't the life of the rich. It was the unremarkable, middle-of-the-road American life, the kind nobody bragged about because everyone had it. The question is, what took it apart? And it starts with the first invisible break. The first break was money itself. For decades, the American dollar was tied to gold at a fixed price, $35 an ounce. It was one of the great constraints of the system, because as long as that tie held, there was a hard limit on how freely money could be created. And on the weekend of August 15, 1971, President Nixon went on television and removed it. The United States would no longer convert dollars into gold. In the very same breath, he froze wages and prices across the entire country for 90 days. That tells you how uneasy the people in charge were about the change they were making. What it meant in plain terms is that money became far more flexible than it had ever been. One of the old constraints was gone, and more flexible money over time tends to be worth a little less. More dollars move through the economy, chasing the same goods. But here is where most versions of this story go wrong. They stop right here, as if this one decision explains everything. It does not, because this was not the whole story. It was the first domino. It opened a door, and the second break came straight through it, from the other side of the world. The second break was energy. In 1973, oil-producing nations cut off supply, and the price of oil exploded almost overnight. For a country that had built its entire way of life around cheap energy, the suburbs, the long commute, the 2-car driveway, cheap goods trucked across a continent, this was a body blow. Gas lines stretched around the block. And here is the part that broke the old rules. Normally, when prices spike, it is because the economy is booming. But this time, prices soared while the economy stalled. Inflation and stagnation at the same time. Something economists had been told was impossible. They had to invent a new word for it: stagflation. So now, the comfortable arithmetic of that 1971 paycheck was being hit from 2 directions at once. 2 breaks down, and you'd think the worst was over. But the third break is the one almost nobody sees coming, because it didn't happen in Washington or in the oil fields. It happened inside the home. The third break was the second paycheck. As the cost of living climbed through the 70s, families did the obvious, sensible thing. The second parent, usually the mother, went to work. more income, more security. It should have made families richer. And here is the cruel twist at the heart of this whole story. In the long run, it made the squeeze worse. Think about what happens when millions of families suddenly have two incomes instead of one. They can all afford to bid a little more for the same things, and the most important of those, the one in fixed supply, is the house in the good school district. When everyone has more to spend on a limited number of homes, the price of those homes does not stay still. It rises to swallow the new money. So the second income, the one that was supposed to be a cushion, got absorbed by a housing market that simply climbed to meet it. The two-income family wasn't bidding against poverty anymore. It was bidding against every other two-income family. And once two incomes became normal, two incomes became necessary because the prices had already adjusted to assume both. The thing families reached for to save themselves got woven directly into the cost of survival. They ran twice as fast and stood in exactly the same place. 3 breaks, the money, the oil, the second paycheck. But there is a fourth, the quietest of them all, and in some ways the most important. The fourth break was the split between work and reward. For most of the 20th century, American workers and the American economy rose together. As workers produced more, their pay went up roughly in step. That was the deal, even if no one ever wrote it down. Produce more, earn more. And according to decades of economic data, that link held firm from the end of World War II until the early 70s. And then it broke. Productivity kept climbing. But the typical worker's pay flattened. Two lines that had traveled together for a generation split apart and never rejoined. Now, economists genuinely argue about why. Some point to the decline of unions, some to globalization, some to the way we measure inflation itself. Those are real debates, but almost no one disputes the shape of it. Somewhere in the 70s, the workers stopped getting their full share of what they produced. And when your pay stops growing while the cost of houses, healthcare, and college keep climbing, you do not feel it as a single event. You feel it as a slow, grinding sense that no matter what you do, you cannot get ahead. So step back and look at all four together. Money became unencord. Energy turned expensive. The second income got swallowed by housing. And the link between work and reward quietly snapped. No single one of them built the world we live in. They stacked, each one making the next one heavier, until the life that used to be ordinary became something most people can no longer reach. The strange thing about that family in 1971 is that they never knew they were living in a golden age. Nobody wakes up and says, "These are the good years." You just assume the deal you were born into is permanent, that this is simply how things work and always will. The house, the car, the single paycheck, none of it disappeared overnight. It disappeared one quiet, broken assumption at a time. And most people never noticed until the math stopped working. So the next time someone tells you that people back then were just tougher or wanted less or worked harder than we do, you will know it is not that simple. They were not better than us. They were standing in the one brief moment when everything lined up. And we are living in the long aftermath of the decade it came apart, still working, still trying, still wondering why the math that worked for our grandparents refuses to work for us.